Okay, here's a brief history of the city of Winnipeg in Manitoba. The first European settlement comes in 1738, with the expansion westwards of the French and British colonists from Canada and what is now the US. They're going further west, fur trapping and exploring. Sieur de la Vérendrye sets up his first fur trading post at Fort Rouge in 1738. The French control this area until the Hudson Bay Company comes along after the 7 Year War. 7 Years' War starts in the 1750s in Canada, between the French and English, and it spreads to Europe and becomes a wider spread conflict around the world. Lord Selkirk later on also purchased land from the Hudson Bay Company for development along the Red River. The Northwest Company and the Hudson Bay Company build forts. Northwest Company builds Fort Gibraltar in 1809, which is named Fort Garry in 1822 for the Fort Garry Horse, a very important military regiment, and the Hudson Bay Company builds Fort Douglas in 1812. There are issues between the settlers, and in the end, the Northwest Company comes out on top. There's an inter-settler conflict. Fort Garry is then destroyed by a flood in 1826 of the Red River, and is rebuilt as late as 1835. Later on, the descendants of Sieur de la Vérendrye, so the French settlers, called Métis by this point because they've intermarried with native peoples and become an ethnic minority on their own, have a Red River Rebellion led by Louis Gale, which then leads to Garnet Wolseley being sent to put down the rebellion by the British authorities, put it down, which then also in turn at that period of time leads to the Manitoba Act of 1870, where the Manitoba becomes the fifth province of Canadian Federation, becomes the fifth province. A few years later, Winnipeg is incorporated as a city as a direct result of this because of the sudden growth of the town along the river. Now, later on in 1881, the Canadian Pacific Railway arrives, which transforms the city economically and socially. It can access the rest of Canada and the US, massive markets for goods, timber, fur, minerals from the ground can be spread all around Canada, coast to coast, and into the US as well. So trade becomes a big thing for Winnipeg. By 1911, it is Canada's third largest city. It's boomtown. Obviously, World War One starts and ends, and in May 1919, the Winnipeg General Strike, where 30,000 workers decided down tools, crippled the economy. And for the next 20 years, there's a massive economic downturn, partly because the Panama Canal has now been opened and is controlled by the US, and partly because of this strike, which is broken on the 21st of June 1919 by the Royal Canadian Mounted Police when they charged the strikers. 2 are killed, about 30 are injured. There is an economic downturn for 20 years, and partly that is due partly to the opening of the Panama Canal. There are several recessions, including the Wall Street crash in 1929, which has a massive economic impact on trade. And as Winnipeg is a trade centre on the railway, massive impact. The economic downturn ends in 1939 with the start of World War II. The local regiment, the Winnipeg Grenadiers, fights the Battle of Hong Kong and fights the Japanese. It's one of several local Manitoban forces in World War II. And the survivors are captured and have to do the hunger marches and build the Burmese railway, etc. They suffer some terrible, terrible, terrible things. But because of World War II and the sudden boom in trade and especially in the arms industry and the support industries for the war, by 1950 the city is expanding again. But then the Red River likes flooding a lot, and we'll talk about that a lot more. And it bursts its banks, floods, and slows the growth of the city for several years. Then they build some flood defences, which come in very, very crucial in 3 later floods of the Red River, and save the city from further devastation. But the Red River flood in 1950 really, really slows the development of the city. The City of Winnipeg Act in 1972 is brought in, which upgrades the laws of the city and the level of what the city is, and it's replaced by a charter in 2003. However, Winnipeg has been severely affected by recessions, especially in the 80s, which partly then affected the 90s and the Canadian and the sports side of the city, which I discuss on my other channel. And it slowed the growth of the city rapidly. Because it is a transit hub and a trade hub, it relies heavily on goods coming in and out, both by rail and by road and by air. The recession in the 80s really hammered the city hard. Then there were 3 more floods, 97, 2009 and 2011, which also have affected the city economically. It is now the 7th largest Canadian city. It was the 3rd at one point. Economic downturns here and after the Winnipeg Act really did harm the city's growth. But it's an amazing city. It's a city that literally is there because of trade. It's on a trading point. It's got a very interesting history. The early history is more interesting, I think, than the later history. I think. Economically, yeah, it's very close to the US border. It's midway between East and Western Canada, but because of the Panama Canal, Vancouver overtook it in the 1920s. The trade, because Vancouver sailed down the Pacific coast into Panama, and you can go and trade all those goods to the Atlantic quicker than taking it by train. Yeah, more on a boat than on a train. You can trade more. But there you go. Brief little history of the city of Winnipeg. Very interesting city. And there we go. So there you go. Thank you very much for watching. Brief little short overview. There's some important bits where we can do videos on specific things, such as the Winnipeg General Strike, such as the Battle of Hong Kong, the Red River Flood of 1950, the Winnipeg Act of 1972, and actually go into more depth. But brief overview. The Hudson Bay Company and the Northwest Company helped found the city. There was French involvement. There was a bit of, unrest. It's a city that's had a very interesting history. Anyway, thank you very much for watching. Please like and subscribe, place your comments below, and I'll have some more videos for you soon.